you can keep your operating costs down, the less cash you need and the less cash reserves you need. And those can be the difference of survival or failure of the business.
Join us as we explore the essentials of managing cash flow in entrepreneurship, emphasizing strategies to maintain healthy liquidity, avoid common pitfalls, and secure your business's financial health. We'll discuss practical tips for effective cash flow management, including forecasting and resource allocation to ensure your business thrives in any economic climate.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Professor Palin. How are you today?
Doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastically. Thanks so much for asking. We've gotten together today to discuss the lifeblood of the business, and that's cash flow.
We very often will talk about how important the various topics that we're addressing at that point. To me, this is absolutely slam dunk, the most important aspect of any business, not just entrepreneurial, but any business, cash flow.
Without a doubt. And understanding intimately what it means for your business is really important, especially the difference between cash flow and profitability, which a lot of business people get focused on just the profit, the top dollars that they're making out of it. And they don't focus on that lifeblood, what's keeping their lights on, paying their employees, getting jobs done every day, which is cash flow behind the business.
Yeah, that's a very common misperception. People confusing cash flow with profit or equating cash flow with profit. The easiest way I think of it is you don't pay your bills with profit. You pay your bills with cash.
I know one thing you've always preached is cash is king.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I've seen more businesses go down because they didn't manage their cash flow. Sometimes when companies are growing so rapidly, I know we did an episode on uncontrolled growth, you can actually grow yourself out of business because your cash flow can't keep up with the growth.
That statement might be really confusing for people listening, but essentially what we're saying is if you're growing so rapidly, you have to buy the resources, whether it's a service or a product, to be able to make, produce, service that thing before you get paid for it. So if you have uncontrollable growth, your resource cost spikes and your money out of that product or service hasn't come in yet. So you have to be able to accommodate for the before to get to the after.
Managing that cash and predicting the cash flow as you move forward in managing that is critical to the success. So that's why anybody listening to this, if you're not projecting what your cash flow needs are, start doing it today.
An easy tool for that is just a cash flow statement. It might seem like a mundane accounting exercise to do this on a very frequent interval, but it's really going to give you the insight that you need to survive.
Yeah, of all the financial statements that you can have produced, if I had to pick one and only one that I could use, I would pick a cash flow statement.
Absolutely. For those listening, you can Google cash flow statement or cash flow template online and a lot will come up. But really what you're looking for is cash inflows. So how is money coming in? So revenue from sales, interests or dividends received, refunds or rebates, if that's applicable to you. You're essentially looking at that over what you need to produce. So everything coming in the door and then what everything is costing you to get to an end result.
Simply, it's cash in, cash out. And cash in needs to be higher than cash out.
Yeah, it's funny talking about it in those terms because it sounds so incredibly simplistic.
If someone's thinking of their personal finance, if they continually, like you can have a month that it's obviously flipped, but on your personal finances, if you continually have more cash out than cash in, I believe they call that bankruptcy.
Yeah. Or a negative trend toward bankruptcy, at least. You might have a long runway before you're actually bankrupt, but it's not a good trend to be in.
It's just like a personal income. You need more coming in than going out. It's the same thing with a business.
It's also amazing when I personally have consulted for companies that although they are profitable, although they are making a large amount of money every month, they're still in failure. And that is a difficult concept to wrap your head around, and people are pushed well past that point before correcting it, and they don't see the warning signs written all over the walls.
Very typically when I've consulted with businesses, 9 times out of 10, they come to me and say they have a sales or a marketing problem. And if they could only sell more, they would be in a more stable position. But the reality when I dig down it's really a cash flow issue. It's not a sales issue. I did one particular company that we did analysis of the product line, and their major product they were selling, I think they had about 5 basic products, but the major one they were selling, when we did a cost analysis of what it cost them to produce and what they were selling it for, they were selling it for less than it was costing them to make. And they wanted us to increase the sales. It would have magnified the problem. The more they sold, they would have been in a deeper hole.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? They're digging their own grave.
They were looking at their 5 products in the aggregate, and we just went down and did a deep dive of how much it cost per product. Ironically, when I said, look, you need to raise the price of this product, and their comment was they still didn't get it. They said, but if we raise the price, no one will buy it. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm selling it for $1 and it's cost me $1.50 to make, well, if people don't buy it, I'm still improving.
That's very funny, isn't it? But this company was probably full of smart people. It's no slight off of them. Sometimes it just takes viewing it with this light to truly understand what's going on.
They had never done analysis on the unit pricing. They had just done aggregate pricing.
So overall, when they sell their package of goods, they make money. They don't realize they have a secret killer that they're selling as well. And this is not to be confused with a loss leader, which is a very legitimate strategy where you might have one product that you're losing money on to get new clients or to expose your other products to the existing clients.
Those are just temporary pricing strategies and very legitimate.
Very legitimate. We're not against loss leaders. And in fact, I think most businesses have some loss leader to some degree.
If someone's not familiar with the term loss leader, I like to look at it, and this is more United States example. Think of Thanksgiving. The supermarket will have the price of the turkey at a very reasonable amount. And where they make money is on the fixings, the cranberry sauce, etc., that they're selling. They're trying to attract people into the supermarket with a good price of turkey per pound, and they're making their profit on the side items, if you will.
Hopefully everybody listening has a pretty good understanding of what cash flow is. And we've talked about a cash flow statement. But where I really see this become powerful for business owners is when you use it for forecasting. How are you not only looking retroactively, because ultimately a cash flow statement is going to be what you did last month, the 6 months prior, the week prior, the day prior. You could break it down however you wanted. Where it becomes super powerful is how are you using that to make sure that you're growing or sustaining in the next week, month, 6 months, year.
And very important to use that forecasting, then combine that with your budgeting process. One of the things that I see people make a mistake too when they're forecasting or when they're budgeting it, they're looking at sales as flat, whereas virtually there's always some type of seasonality involved with that. And you have to be positioning yourself for the seasonality of the cash flow, because there's naturally, with many industries, there's a dip with the price and an apex with another component of the seasonality. And you want to be able to predict that when you're forecasting, and then you can plan for that.
Do you have any tips or tricks for what that planning looks like?
First of all, I would look at history. If I'm in a startup, there is no history. So I'll look at the seasonality history of the industry. If, for example, if I'm doing manufacturing of children's toys, we understand that there's a spike around the holiday seasons of the Christmas season. And I would look at what's my lead time for production. July, August is probably when I'm really planning for the spike of upfitting my manufacturing. In that point in time, I'm probably in a negative cash flow. But I understand the seasonality of that fluctuation is predictable from year to year. So I would look at historicals.
We could also bring Santa in to consult and make sure that the children's toys industry is booming this year. No, but you're exactly right. Most likely for anything to do with seasonality, it's going to offset certain months so that if you isolate that month, the whole picture doesn't look good, but the year over picture looks fantastic.
If I'm selling something geared towards summer fun, well, there's a major seasonality associated. If I'm targeting school year applications, there's seasonality. September is just a huge spike in sales. Very predictable, but you want to understand that and don't just know it. Put your budget in place based on that.
There's many mistakes people can make with cash flow statements. One of the ones that's always been preached to me is having a minimum of 3 months operating expenses in reserve. An emergency fund, just the same as you would if you were planning for your personal finances, making sure that you have that same thing for your business. For whatever reason, I find that business operators will do that with their personal finances, and they'll run all the way up to the line with their business finances, and just making sure you're treating them the same way.
If you're cutting it too tight, that is walking the tightrope. And even when I'm doing projections for a startup, I'll look at what type of investment that I need. Well, first I'll look at all the expenses that I'm projecting out. And I like to project out over 3 years when I'm doing a startup. But I will look at what cash infusion do I need, be it if it's from self-financing, if it's from bootstrapping, angel, etc. And I'll do the entire spreadsheet so that the lowest point, the lowest month is zero, that I have zero cash at the end of the month. Then I know that I have to then raise that much more money to bring that zero to 3 months worth of expenses. And it helps you understand how much do I need to raise. And it's not raising all the money in pre-start. I might need to raise in pre-start, and then in a year from now, I need to raise X number of dollars more. It helps you plan not only what your cash flow is, but how much infusion you need beyond sales.
And that's the trick to growth. Many people get stuck at these inflection points, so at a point of rapid growth, because they don't have the ability to look at cash flow and make that determination. They go and they get a small loan, or they sell some business asset to get a small amount of money to build up, and they'd have like hiccups in their growth instead of looking far enough out and being able to use that predictive analysis, like you just talked about, to go and raise the appropriate funds to keep that growth steady.
Ryan, before we continue, I'd like to address an important issue for the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast. Creating a quality podcast with valuable content is very time consuming and has substantial costs to create and produce. To cover these costs, many podcasts use a paid subscription model. Others use a sponsorship model. We prefer not to implement either of these options. I would like to address a concept called value for value podcasting.
While we enjoy creating value for our listeners, providing insights that enhance their entrepreneurial success, it would mean the world to us if our audience would also give some value back to us to support our efforts.
One might wonder, how can you support our show? Well, it's simple. Sharing our podcast with friends, colleagues, or on your social media is a fantastic way to give back.
Also, we love receiving your feedback, comments, or even just a cheerful email.
Or consider making a monetary contribution through platforms such as Venmo or Substack.
You can also support us by setting up a bill payment through your bank. This method allows you to send a contribution directly to our physical address.
Every bit of support counts, whether it's tuning in, sharing our episodes, or contributing financially. Each contribution helps us cover production costs and improve the podcast.
Check out our website at prospirit.com, where you can find more details on how to support us. Every contribution, no matter the size, makes a massive difference. Decide for yourself, what is the value of this episode to you? Let's do this together. We provide value and you return value. Value for value podcasting.
Thank you for being a part of Let's Get Entrepreneurial. Now, let's get back to today's episode. If someone is listening and saying, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this or what you're talking about, then I would say make sure you have an accountant that you're working with. Tell your accountant what you would like and have them guide you through that. They can crunch the numbers for you and sit down with them to explain what you need to do. Go to an expert if you're unfamiliar, if this is something that freaks you out.
Even if it's just to get a handle on what you've done up to this point, that can be a great starting point. Even if you're not willing to commit to having somebody on staff or doing it full time, just get an understanding of where you are today, at least.
Challenges that I see people face with dealing with cash flow that very often is not anticipated is dealing with late payments, dealing with high overhead costs. Those are areas that can impact your cash flow. So for example, if you go in and negotiate, if you have a physical location, well, you better negotiate really hard for your rent, because if I'm paying, say, $3,000 a month and I can get it down to $2,500 a month, that's an impact on your cash flow. So the lower you can keep your operating costs down, the less cash you need and the less cash reserves you need. And those can be the difference of survival or failure of the business.
Long-term contracts are tough, especially when you're getting into it initially. It can be very daunting, but it can kill the lifeblood of the business as well, especially in the beginning.
And I mentioned too, late payments. So basically you want to handle both your receivables, but you also want to handle your payables. If you're looking in terms of you have to give credit to your customers, so you're sending an invoice out, and if you say net 30, and if someone's not familiar with the term, that means theoretically the customer is going to pay you within 30 days. I always try to assume that it's really 45 to 60 days in my planning, because people are not going to pay you that, especially if you're dealing with a larger company and you're a startup. What are you going to do? They have all the power. It's not that they're not going to pay you, but they're going to play with your cash to help their cash flow.
Net 15 turns to net 30, net 30 turns to net 60. That has been my experience to a big degree.
Yeah, I remember playing around with 2% 10, net 30. If someone's not familiar with that, net 30, they pay me in 30 days. If they pay me within 10 days, they get a 2% discount, trying to improve cash flow. But when I was doing that, it was a very small business, and people would pay me in 45 days and still take the 2%.
That's pretty brutal, isn't it?
And I have no recourse, really, because that type of business, I really didn't have a competitive advantage. I was starting out. I didn't understand those issues, but there were 10 other people I could buy from and nothing I could do. So I took away that 2% really quick.
That's funny. Make sure if you're doing these net 30, net 60, net 15, you account for the time it takes to reach back out to your client to get paid. I'm always shocked at how long it takes to collect money, and people typically view end of job, product or service, whatever it is, I'm just paid. And they don't factor in the amount of effort and a lot of time to actually get that through.
It's very uncomfortable too. If you're the one doing the selling and the collecting, it puts you in an uncomfortable position.
It does. Better get used to it though. Having somebody sign the contract is only the first step of getting paid.
I'm sure like with your consulting, you have X percentage paid up front, and then maybe a deliverable, another percentage paid, and then conclusion.
Without a doubt. And people want very long payment terms with consultants because they want to see the quality of work and they want to see the output. So they want that to come into effect before they actually have to pay for it. That becomes a little bit of a difficult negotiation sometimes.
There's all types of tools to help you with this also. There's various accounting software. I just use a spreadsheet and do it all myself, but there's plenty of tools out there that'll do it for you.
Tools and people. There are very, very good accountants or controllers also can put this type of stuff together. Well, fantastic. Any final thoughts before we let cash flow ruminate with our listeners?
Hopefully they're taking notes while we're speaking. If not, go back and take notes, listen once again, and apply these strategies very seriously that we discussed to your own business, and focus very critically on maintaining a positive cash flow, because that's one of the easiest ways for the demise of your business is not managing your cash flow.
As always, take it seriously. Sometimes accounting can seem mundane and monotonous, but it really is so important.
And also, I'd like to remind people if they would subscribe to our podcast, we'd like to have them continually following in on the various topics that we're asking. And if they want any additional information, they can go to our website at profspirit.com.
Absolutely. Help us grow the podcast. Share it with somebody else that you think might be interested in this stuff too.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
We extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Check out profspirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.